I'm Michael Pennington. I'm playing Dr. Fabio della Ragione. Although the play was written in the late 1960, late 1950s, 1960, it's very much like a new play because nobody knows it outside of Italy, and in fact not many people inside of Italy either. And so it's a little bit like talking about a new play, and therefore I have a slight caginess about telling you the story. But it's a fascinating story about, well, let's put it this way, an organization that dispenses a form of unofficial justice in the troubled city of Naples at that period, which is not to be confused with this period. And as part of the structure, there's a doctor who's a well-trained doctor and a good doctor, but because he's well-treated and well-paid, fallen in with both the morals and the practices of this organization, and has reached a point in his life which is not unlike my age, when he's had enough and wants to move to America and live out his life in peace and regain, as he says, some dignity. And his struggle to get away from the organization is, one of the themes of the play, and the difficulties that are put in his way, some of them quite startling and threatening. I have a feeling that in the play he also acts as a kind of, what would the word be, a lens for the audience too, because a lot of the play, though it's fascinating material, is slightly exotic in a way for an audience. It's dealing with people you're not likely to meet in Notting Hill Gate, or indeed in Chichester, or indeed in Malvern, or Bath, or Cambridge, or Milton Keynes. And I think it's very important, as in all good plays, that there's a character who is like a spokesman for the audience and in a way interprets the play for the audience, so that they say, oh, that's what I would feel if I was in that position. What a terrible position to be in. And what a dilemma he's got himself in. He's made a mistake in his life and he needs to get away. So there's a kind of common ground between the audience and the character. I'm not suggesting there isn't with the other characters, but it's more familiar. It's more the part that you would say, yes, that's what I would do, that's the problem I would have, that's the fear that I would have. So in that sense, I think it's, a very important way into the play for the audience. So what keeps him there is a mixture of compulsion, literally compulsion, he's not allowed to leave, but also a deep, though weakening, loyalty to Don Antonio, with whom he's worked, after all, for 35 years on a program which is very idealistic, which he believes will do good and has done good for many troubled and poor people in Naples who can't find justice or find representation through the system because the system is corrupt and or operates against the interests of the poor. So Fabio and Antonio have led a kind of crusade to give these people justice, and that's difficult to give up. Just as it's difficult to give up a lifetime in the theatre, if you believe in the theatre, or anything else that you believe in. He's partly kept there by his sense of loyalty, and then in the denouement of the play, without again spelling it out too much, it's clear that he sees a way through in which the work can be continued, he hopes, and things can be improved with him in charge. If you know Naples, and if you know the history of the south of Italy at all, you know that it's a fond hope, because here we are in 2011, and it's a city that I know very well as it happens. I have many friends there, and it's in as bad a situation as ever it was before. A city that's very easy to love if you visit, but not so easy to live in at all. So the irony is that an audience now who knows that will sit and listen to Fabio's refound idealism and hope at the end of the play with a very sceptical eye, because they know what he didn't know. If you're a highly skilled doctor, you're there to save lives, and if you think the local hospital isn't going to do the work, you do it at home. So there's an honour in it, an idealism. Unfortunately, you're often colluding in crime and corruption, which Naples has always suffered from hugely. At this time, though, it's quite important in a way to say we're not talking about drugs and prostitution and all that kind of more modern corruption. It's more to do with extortion and racketeering and protection. It's not to do with the current ills that you would see, say, in the movies of the Godfather movies. This is a particular moment in Italian history in the late 50s when you could almost see some good in this kind of an organization, because actually the basis of it is honorable and idealistic. I don't know that he's physically unwell. I think he complains a lot. He complains about being put upon. He regards himself as being subject to nervous attacks, but they're usually nervous attacks brought on by fear of being murdered. So I don't think we can blame him for that. He's mentally in trouble because of this division in him, you know, that he doesn't know whether to stay or to go, or how to set about whatever decision he makes. So he's a complicated character, you know, and we keep finding in some ways that this play has an element of Chekhov in it. Though Chekhov is much more complex psychologically, and Fabio to that extent is like one of those Chekhov doctors. There's one in almost every Chekhov play who are, I mean, they either drink too much or they've lost their faith in medicine, or they're in one way or another in emotional difficulties. And there's a little, though it's not as done quite in the Chekhov manner, there's something of that in it as well. A doctor who loses his faith is a sad figure, you know, because what are you losing your faith in? Something that is incredibly important to everybody. And because, you know, good doctors are always idealists, even though they're casual and skeptical and flip and cynical, they passionately believe in what they do, or they wouldn't live such a difficult life. So I'm not sure that he's mentally or physically unwell. I think he's mentally in extreme conflict and distress, but that's as far as I would go. There's no doubt who wears the trousers, who's got the power in it. I mean, certainly Don Antonio has the power of life and death. But the fact they've stayed together for so long and will have met at a moment when you could have had the same ideals, I mean, back in the 1920s it would be, suggests that the relationship was quite deep. I wouldn't say it was a deep friendship. It's rather like the relationships you have, for instance, in the theatre very often, with many, many people who are not exactly friends or intimate friends, but very, very close colleagues, which almost amounts to the same thing. So it's a professional, in a way, a professional friendship that the two of them have. And I think if you caught them in a bar on a good night, I think you would find that there was a great deal of warmth between them. But in the play, what you see them in is in a degree of conflict and strain and pull between them, so you don't get much of the warm side of the relationship. It's a mystery. And again, a bit like a Chekhov character, he's attached to the family without being a blood relative. It's very clear who the family is. There's this very close southern Italian family with the three children and the wife, and indeed the housekeeper, who is attached in a similar way, but in a way more intimate, because the housekeeper will have been a nanny at one point to the children. And the doctor is this sort of mystery man who appears to have no life outside of this. Eduardo hasn't given him a family. When he decides he wants to go to America, there's no talk of a wife or children or reasons why, except that he wants himself to go. So I get the impression of a loner or a secretive man. He certainly doesn't seem to have any dependence or any relationships outside of the family, but at the same time he's not of the family. And so he's both of it and not. It's a funny kind of dependency he has on them and that they have on him. Yeah, I've not been directed by Sean before, which is proving a fantastic pleasure. Except we did do a sort of 30-minute play last year at the Ivy restaurant about the history of the Ivy, which was a charming thing to do. So that's a first for me. Ian McKellen, I've worked with 3 times before, I think, over the years. Oliver, Sherry Lungi too. Some of the younger ones, obviously not, because I just see this fantastic generation of young actors coming out of drama school, several of whom we have now within the first couple of years. It just knocked my socks off. I mean, I couldn't do at their age what they do at all. So that's a fantastic pleasure of getting a little older. And the other pleasure is working again and again with people you've known the best part of your life. I must confess that I'm an Eduardo de Filippo nut. I've always loved these plays. And it's a mystery to me why he's still a bit of a closed book to English audiences, to English theatre, in fact. We know 3 or 4 of the plays. I remember back in, I think, the late 60s when the first one was done, Saturday, Sunday, Monday. And Joan Plowright actually cooked a spaghetti bolognese on the stage, and all the reviews were full of it, and audiences just flocked to the theatres to smell the ragu, you know. And it was thought to be this amazing breakthrough in theatrical realism. Well, it's kind of old hat now, that. I mean, you smell all sorts of things from the stage in plays nowadays, but at that time it was thought to be a most wonderful thing. But that play and Philomena, which I did with Judi Dench about 10 years ago at the Piccadilly, are really the only 2 that are well known, and there are 45 of them. and I've got my hands on several of them. I hope to get through a few more before I finish, because if you imagine Alan Ayckbourn with that mix of tragedy is too strong a word, but let's call it tragicomedy, where the comedy is always laced with cruelty or satire or something, and very serious situations are turned into a joke as well. And you translate him into Italy, and then you go a step further and translate him into southern Italy, which of course is a completely different culture from northern Italy. I mean, Naples is not Venice or Rome or Milan or Turin. Into this very particular culture. Then you've got something of what Eduardo was. The other thing that he was is something that we don't have at all, which is someone who's both the writer, the director, the producer, and the star of his own company. Don't think there's anyone who's done that. Harold Pinter, of course, was, apart from being a wonderful writer, was also a director and an actor, but I don't think he ever did them at the same time. So it's an absolutely unique form of theatre from an industrial point of view. He wrote mostly about the few blocks outside the theatre. It was very, very local. People knew the streets and the houses and indeed the shops he talked about in the place. It was very, very local. So it's amazing that it travels at all. And there's, I think, just a warmth and a vitality and a theatrical brilliance about the plays. He was born in a trunk. His father was an actor. His mother was, I think, was a wardrobe mistress, a very, very theatrical background. So he knew from childhood what worked on the stage and what didn't, and how theatrical surprise works. And his plays are full of surprises. And I hope and think this play is enthralling to watch, because you think you know what you're in for, and then you're surprised all the time, either by the character changing direction or the situation not being quite what you thought it was. I think he's fabulous, and the more we do to beat the drum for him here, the happier I'll be. I think what you learn quickly is to keep your eyes and ears open, to learn as fast as you can from working with people who've been around for a long time when you start. And inevitably you perhaps begin hero worshipping a bit. I think it's very important for young actors to stop hero worshipping soon, because otherwise they'll never develop their own voice, quite literally their own voice. And I was lucky when I started, because I went straight to the RSC as a very small beer indeed. I had no lines the first year or two, but I was there, say, with Ian Holm, Paul Schofield, and I just couldn't believe what I was seeing. I thought, that's how you do it. You make it up differently each night. It's different each night. How do you manage to be so subtle, say, as Ian Holm was, in a theatre that size? I mean, it was an incredible learning curve. So whereas a lot of my contemporaries went into rep and got into that whole process of putting plays on in a terrible hurry and learning, technical tricks to do it with, I had a sort of, I suppose you'd say, as a kind of postgraduate experience of a couple of years of really not having a lot of responsibility myself, but watching people who are really at the top of their game. Then you've got to stop, otherwise you'll start imitating people, and believe in yourself. But it's important. I mean, to listen. It's important to have that older actors take care of you a little bit and support you. This whole mutual support system we have in business is very, very important. If you play Hamlet for 2 years at the RSC, you can't deny that that's maybe what you've been working towards and will never recover from, of course. And that I was lucky enough to do that, and lucky enough to do it in those circumstances, because I wasn't playing it every night. I was in repertoire with other players, and yet I lived with the part for 2.5 years. I mean, that's a rare opportunity that only the subsidised theatre, repertoire theatre, gives you. But I'm also very, very fond of plays that, on the whole, people don't know, like Timon of Athens is a great favourite of mine that I did at Stratford about 10 years ago. So the honest answer is, with the single exception of Hamlet, which obviously I'm not now going to do again, it's whatever I'm doing at the time. I've been very lucky. I've very rarely wished a show over or a part gone. Master Builder at Chichester last year, I wish we could have done for longer. The Ronnie Harwood play is about Strauss-Wengler, Furtwängler and Strauss. I wish could have gone on for longer. Though goodness knows they went over 2 years. And I've just begun to want to play King Lear. So it's a matter of when and how, and finding a way of doing it while I've still got the energy to do it.